I did mention we had a guest today, and that is Alex of Domain. As I mentioned, it's an Australian property marketplace, and he actually forked and then modified PipeRider to add a new feature that compares data sets. And I saw there's actually a cool Venn diagram in this, which will show you how similar or different the two data sets are. And I think Alex may have also made some modifications to the CLI. I'm not sure, but we might get a sneak peek at that. But anyway, thanks for joining us this morning. And I'll pass over to you.
Hey, Alex, how are you doing?
Yeah, pretty good. Good to see you, Sal.
Yeah, good to see you
Thanks
again.
for having me.
Thanks for joining. Why don't you start with telling us like what Domain does, and then what's your kind of work on Domain's data infrastructure?
Yeah, sure. So Domain is an Australian property listing platform. It's pretty big, one of the two major player in the market. And I'm working in the data team, working on a project. It's mainly in Snowflake and then DBT, which is to build a centralized platform to process all the property data. And then the product is powering the downstream product team, which then they use to serve the different domains customer.
So like your modeling use is not just for analytics, right? So that result goes into the product for your consumers. Yeah,
it's kind of a new pattern for using Snowflake. It's kind of interesting because it's kind of using as kind of a processing engine, and then you're powering the operational team.
Yeah, we definitely see that more of that, and why like people care about the process of modeling and then trying to get it more close to things that we can review. And then with PipeRider, we hope that to achieve that. So I understand you have something to show us, right?
Yeah, I made a few slides. Might I just share the screen? Is this seeing good?
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh yeah. So yeah, it's got PipeRider, Reconcile, and as I said, my project, what I do is I connect into the multiple products and try to sell what my team has produced, and then it's kind of like a migration project for these product teams. So the main motivations I got this work is to ease the process of reconcile datasets during migration projects. Usually people start, hey, yeah, I can use your dataset, but how's comparing with mine? And then that starts the whole cycle then, and getting a dataset and then compare with that. See how it performs, and if they're happy, then we can move forward. But then the pain points is there's a lot of different people come in and using different methods. Some people write custom query and save that in GitHub, and some other people prefer to just check everything in the Google Docs, save the result in Google Sheets, and over time, it's very hard to reproduce the results, and also to manage these reports. So yeah, the main motivation is to make that result reproducible and easy to share reports. And also the main thinking is, I think the setup should be declarative, and that can standardize the setup. Say you have a base and target table, how you want to compare these two tables. And the last is I think the PipeRider, the profiling feature is what hits me, and I really like it. So I think it's a good idea to reuse the existing code base to see what I can do.
Right. What kind of migration are you doing? What's from where to where?
So for example, one team, they mainly use the SQL Server for the past 10 years. And then, so we try to we're trying to provide a similar data set in Snowflake to them, so they can
Right.
connect into the Snowflake. So the comparison is between the table in Snowflake versus what's in the SQL Server.
Mm-hmm. All right.
Yeah, so that comes down to saying the feature that I like to have. And the first is it's easy to define a base and target table and how and the join key. So as Theo mentioned, that's it's a row level comparison like the tooling. So during that reconcile, they require more than just column profiling results. So they need a very detailed comparison to see how the data set performs. And also the column profiling metric comparison that gives a quick overview of the shape of the data. And the Venn diagram of primary key cardinality. So that gives you an idea of the size of the comparison. So if two table, the primary key, the intersection is really small, then the following comparison doesn't make too much sense. So I want to make sure that we're comparing apple to apple. Yeah, row level reconciliation, as I explained earlier. And also lastly, data type awareness reconciliation metric. So what previously happened a lot is, for example, comparing a number, a numeric column. We're not expecting to be 100% replication of the old data set. It might be something off. So we want to add that tolerance that rate to the comparison. For example, what's the percentage of say the amount is 100% equal, and if you allow that to 5% diff, how that turns out.
Mm-hmm. I saw this. I saw a sneak peek at this during the interview you had with CL last time, and it looked really great. You had like dates within a certain distance from the original, numeric, within 5 or 10%. It's string comparisons. If there was white space, if the white space was trimmed, were they equal? Were they case sensitivity? It would look really good.
Yeah. Because this question now comes from the previous experience, because you get the first version that out, and then the stakeholder asks, hey, what if you lowercase them? What if you trim the white space, so on and so forth? Let's say also borrow the idea of the column comparison, the column profiling from PipeRider. It's a data type aware. So I borrowed that idea to continue on this feature.
Right.
So by having this tolerance, you're kind of expecting that migration that is prolonged, but with some non-difference that is allowed to happen. Is that right? Yeah.
It's a different team, so we can start the conversation and more proactively to say, hey, there's about 5%. Say, is it about 5% difference when it's the case insensitive? What do you think? It probably take a lot more effort to make 100% matching what you already have. But if you're happy with the 5% diff, then we can move it forward. And I think that makes my team's job a lot more proactive during the workflow.
Awesome.
Yes. And so then I start with that. I create a fork of PipeRider, I think it's 0.18 somewhere around that version. And then I added in a reconcile command, and so the way to define is just follow the YAML file, and then for the syntax is I have an idea for the project, and then description at the base and target source, So that's defined in the config, the same as the PipeRider run and compare. And the suites here is really getting a name for the collection of comparison, the reconcile rules. So for example, you get address table, the base, what's the base table name? Ideally, that should be in the old data set. And the join keys, mostly time it's a primary key, and same setup for the target, but that usually the table of what we provide. And the rule here is interesting that defines which column to compare with which. So for example, the street name, just description that tells what this rule is for. So the base column, street name, target column, and also street name. Sometimes you get different name in base and target. For example, you're comparing, they could call suburb name, and in the target, they call locality. And so that makes it clear for the user or for the report reader to know that you're comparing different column, but for the same purpose. And the rules can go on to become a list of array. So after, the way to trigger that, just PipeRider reconcile, and you can pass the configure. Just select different reconcile name. So for example, we pass the migration, and we'll trigger passing all these suites and rules, and run the result. And it looks like, the Y diagram is shown here. So it shows intersection is for that join key, how many can be matched. And you have the base exclusive and target exclusive. So the result here shows is actually pretty good. That's most majority of the data in base and target can match. So that provides a really good comparison base for the following column and row by row compare.
All right. And when you're doing these migrations, once you get to a certain stage, you just kind of pull the trigger, switch it over, and then downstream is now using the new data source. How does that process look like? And does downstream ever say, hey, something's not working here, can we switch back? Or how do you find the process of switching out these data sets?
So it's kind of iterative process. It requires a couple of iterations. So usually we start with, we come in and point me to the couple of data sets that is your key asset, and then we set up in this reconcile feature, and we produce the report and give it to them, and then ideal case is everything is good, and we can move forward. They're pointing to say, hey, why, for example, the column, why there is a big differences here. It's only 70% match. Can you look into that? And analysts will come in to spend time for the further analysis, look through row by row, what made that differences, and we can just make that explainable, and we can see if they accept that explanation or they want further work to be done, and then changes to be made and run the report. And so sometimes a couple of iterations to the point that they're happy with what we provide, and then we'll move forward.
Great. And do you provide them with the PipeRider report to look at directly?
Yeah, I hosted locally. It's not here. I host it locally, so share them to a website, and so they can click and reading all that. So it saves a lot of hassle to share them the Google Sheet, whatever I used to do, and after a while it's all embarrassing in the web, and so it just provides a cleaner way for them to track the old report and the new report.
Yeah, really interesting.
So very cool. So this sounds like, oh wow, you have this matrix as well.
Yeah. And the last step of that is they're happy with the work. I usually encourage them to pick out a few of the metrics. I really like that feature. So that becomes a handshake moment to say, hey, we're going to deliver you on a schedule basis, and here's metrics that that we promise you to meet. So also that provides my team's consumer a peace of mind so they can track and all that.
Right. So like for that kind of migration, I think you have several of that kind of, you have old system and then new ways of doing that. Like how long does that typically last? Like people seem to be using different well, source of truth, right?
Yeah, so usually my project starts around for each product integration around 1 to 2 months, sometimes can spend 2 to 3 months. Yeah.
Right. Very cool. Very cool. Well, thanks for sharing this with us and then with the audience. And then so tell us a little bit more about like your experience like working with the PipeRider code base. And like we really wanted to have that in somewhere in the main branch, and then but apparently you've worked it quite early, right? How did that change?
Yeah, I enjoy it. My tech experience is mainly on the back end, so working a lot with Python. So it's no issue for me to navigate through the CLI part, to adding new command, adding YAML, and so it takes a bit of time to navigate the front end. I'm doing that a lot, and the setups takes a bit of time, but somehow get it all working at the end.
Is it just yourself working on it over there, or do you have other people helping out?
Yeah, just me. But then I got a different idea from within the team to get how the feature that we want to develop. But yeah, the developing mostly I'm doing that at a side time and adding that along the way.
Yeah, very cool. So yeah, so maybe one last thing is that what would be the when we talk about this like modern use cases for the analytics stack, where it's no longer just for analytics, but like the intermediate modeling of the data product that's like useful for the actual product experience. So what's your advice for people using DBT in this case?
Yeah, so I think from my experience, from my experience, setting the model, setting a clear layer of the transformation. By that I mean you have your raw layer, your staging layer. Then sometimes what we do, we have a base layer, and that's get everything ready before joining to make the data mart. I think in the DBT, I think the docs is really good feature. The DBT docs. When we are powering the downstream products, we can send them the report if they want to understand the intricate of underlying the data model of or what's underlying source we use to powering the data that we're providing to them. But sometimes the layer haven't been defined very clearly, and then the results are very messy, like a docs. Ideally, everything in that docs should be, there's no like a cycle, or in March, you're referring table from staging, also you're referring table from base. And my advice would be to just spending time on setting that layer very clearly, and so there's no cross-reference for the table in the data mart, and also that would result in very cleaner diagram, the flow chart in the DB docs for your consumer and for them to navigate.
Right. Yeah, very cool. And then, but I mean, like, this is gonna be messy. You don't get it right the first time, right? So you have to still iterate that, and then it's precisely why we build PipeRider, is like tracking that changes across time, and then making sure like you are delivering the data you want.
Yeah, I think the PipeRider, what I really like the product is to fill the gap in providing profiling. Often when I started jumping, there is a couple hundred of table in Snowflake, and even for a DBT project, you can share the docs to the user and people reading also the schema, the description, if there is test on that or not. But these are kind of the static information. Like I can't just get a quick idea of the data shape in say a couple of minutes.
Right.
I can do that, writing some query in Snowflake, but that piece is missing. But now with PipeRider, I host that page, even also with the PipeRider cloud, I can share with that. And people can come in a couple of minutes, they can have an overview of the min and max, how the column look like. And that's really make the conversation a lot more smoother.
Right. Well, got to hear that it's useful and helpful for you. And then, yeah, cool. So thank you so much for
Yeah, thanks, Alex.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Thank you. And Dave, before we close,
Yeah.
you have things?
Yeah.
Oh, right.
Okay.
So
Alex, I was going to ask you. Yeah, I was going to ask you. Do you have any a website or somewhere you like to share where people can learn more about you? And I see you've got your GitHub fork of PipeRider, so people can check out the code. Is it all available online to see, or?
Yeah, I think I make it public so people can see. And also I got my LinkedIn. I haven't posted here, but you feel free to share that through the community, Dave.
Yeah, I'll put that into the video comments. Thank you, Alex. All right, yeah, great. Thanks for joining us. I'm glad you mentioned PipeRider Cloud as well, because that's really, and also that you're sharing the reports with stakeholders, because that's really what we imagine cloud is used for. You know, during development time, you're looking at the reports yourself, and then, you know, you're also sharing those reports with your team and with stakeholders. So yeah, really glad to hear about to hear you mention PipeRider Cloud and that you're actually sharing reports.